Hey, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and start the introduction while people are coming into the room, just because I want to make sure that Kevin and Eric and Todd have enough time because there's a lot that they have to say. So we're glad you guys could join us. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Cindy Olson, founder of the Executive Strategic Alliance. And in a past life, I was CHRO of Enron. So just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. We are recording this, and I'll send the link to the recording in a follow-up email to everyone that registered and attended. So you can have it if you want to go back and listen to it. And then please feel free to ask questions. I gotta say, Kevin Delaney is one of the experts when it comes to where we are with AI. So you've got him for an hour. You've got Eric and you've got Todd for an hour. So please feel free to ask questions, and you can put them into chat, or you can raise your hand, or you can come off mute and ask them live, whatever. And I'll monitor the chat for any questions that go into chat. Just a bit about ESA before we get started. For the past 6 years, no, it's really 7 years now, we at ESA have partnered with ADP to build this executive community of nearly 3,000 participants in 20 cities, delivering world-class thought leadership, and Kevin's an example of that, and exposure to innovative technologies that are shaping the future of work. And we're unique in that we include CHROs, CIOs, and other work tech executives because we believe that they all have to be in lockstep to be able to deliver the kind of worker experience that's necessary to attract and retain talent. And finally, we offer a board positioning membership that provides many of the resources an executive needs to navigate to their perfect board seats. So check it out on our website if you're interested. Today, I'm really excited, as you can tell, to welcome Kevin Delaney back again. He's the CEO and editor-in-chief of Charter, which is a media and services company that aims to transform every workplace. He was previously a senior editor for the New York Times and The Information. He co-founded Quartz and served as co-CEO and editor-in-chief from 2012 to 2019. And prior to Quartz, Kevin was a reporter at the Wall Street Journal for a decade, with that time split between Paris and San Francisco. He became managing editor of the WSJ.com, where he led efforts that helped greatly expand the journal's online relationship. And Kevin was just at Davos this year speaking and discussing AI. He's totally an expert in this area, you guys. So joining Kevin today is Eric Olmo and Todd Renaud. Deanna Jones of Baker Hughes was set to join us, but she is in London this week traveling on business, and her schedule changed at the last minute. So she wants to join us for another thought leadership session in the future. Eric is the SVP of People and Spaces at BMC Software, and prior to BMC, where he spent nearly 20 years, he was at Gateway and the Federal Reserve Bank. And Todd is the CIO of Southeastern Grocers. Prior to that, Todd was CIO of Cons. He was at the Security Services Federal Credit Union, and I knew him many years ago when he was at Enron. So with that, I will turn it over to Kevin. Kevin, it's all yours.
Cindy, thanks so much. It's great to join this group again. And the combination of tech and people executives is in my experience, is pretty unique for this high-level senior discussion, and for this topic's perfect to be convening these groups. What we're going to do, we've blocked out this hour to talk through the state of AI in work, and what I'm planning to do is first start by going through some of the research best practices, sort of mini case studies of what businesses are doing. So to give you a sense of what researchers are talking about and what some of your peers are doing that you may not fully have on your radar. We're a future of work media and research company, as Cindy said, and we do a lot of reporting in our own research and talk to a lot of your peers about what's working and what's not for them. So I'm going to spend the first maybe 10 minutes or so just walking through some of the things that we're hearing right now. And then I'm going to pull in Eric and Todd for a discussion about some of the same themes and how the state of affairs and some of the opportunities and challenges they see around using AI in their own businesses. And then we're going to take any feedback, questions, interventions that you all have through the remainder of the time. And hopefully this is as informal and dynamic as possible. Really encourage you to use the chat. If there's something you want to hear about, we'll try and keep an eye on it and follow up. And so I'm going to start by walking through, as I said, some of the takeaways from research and the conversations we're having with your peers about how they're using AI. To make this as interesting as possible, I've structured them in the form of what I call provocations. So these are things that hopefully provoke some thought or reaction from you. And I've tried to frame them as starkly as possible. So the first provocation I'll dive into is the end of some jobs is in sight because of artificial intelligence. And so there's a lot of discussion about the impact on roles. And what we're seeing is that there are some roles where the use of AI tools actually has a really significant impact. And as many of you, I'm sure, are aware, the ones that are clearest here are ones involving call center, customer service, and support. There's an example of a European buy now, pay later platform called Klarna, which you may have seen, where they put their customers directly in contact with a customer service bot. The customers could opt out of it, but a lot of them chose to. And they say that the bot is now servicing, providing the equivalent of 700 human workers of customer service support with similar quality ratings from their customers, and actually much lower response times and issue resolution times. And so I think this is sort of the bleeding edge. You know, I'm sure a lot of organizations would be reluctant to have their clients directly interact with bots and the reasons for that. But I also think it points to a direction that we're going into. A lot of you may be familiar with Ethan Mollick. He's at Wharton, and he's, I would argue, one of the most important thinkers right now on the use of AI for education, because he's at Wharton, but also for work specifically. He has a book that just came out a week or two ago called Co-Intelligence, which I'd recommend. And I spoke with him recently, and he was saying that a lot of companies that he's talking to are actually using generative AI in place of hiring management strategy consultants. And so I don't know that the management consultant, there's some portion of you probably be really excited if management consultants went away, or their fees went away at least. I don't know how endangered they are for real, but what I do, you know, the point that I want to make is that while the pace of implementation is uneven, there are some specific areas where we're seeing that AI is effectively replacing workers. The second provocation that I have is that many managers would like to shed workers if AI could replace them. This is related. There's a PwC survey that was released at Davos that said that about 25% of CEOs expect to reduce their headcount by at least 5% this year as a result of generative AI. And so the executive desire to use AI to reduce personnel costs is present and significant. We're going to get into the discussion about what the reality is in terms of how many organizations are able to do that. But we've seen organizations like IBM where the CEO said they would be hiring fewer human resources professionals over the next few years. Thanks to AI, we've seen marketing at a bunch of companies where they've said they're hiring fewer marketers because of AI. The third provocation is that most organizations are struggling to see AI productivity gains at the corporate level. And so a lot of the focus has been on tasks. McKinsey did some of the best work last year around mid-year. They released this really important report on the implications of AI for work, and they looked at a task level. And what they basically did is for each role, common roles, analyze what are the specific tasks that people do. And there are a lot of tasks in jobs. Some jobs may have 30 tasks in them, a knowledge worker job. And what they found is that a significant percentage of people, actually, a lot of their tasks could be done by AI. But what we're seeing, while that's true, what we're seeing is that people are able to use AI tools for specific tasks, knowledge workers especially. The the efficiency gains are not uh, rising to a corporate level. And there are a few reasons for this. One is that people are, for a lot of people, it's not clear kind of what to do with any time savings they have. It's not necessarily translating into more revenue, unless you're a salesperson or something. What the experts say is that the real productivity gains and business gains from AI come when you actually look at workflows and not just tasks. And what this means is the processes kind of stepping back. We just spoke to the chief digital information officer at ServiceNow, and he calls them mode 1 and mode 2. Mode 1 is kind of incremental advances because someone is using an AI tool to write a draft of a memo or something like that. And mode 2 is stepping back and like, how are these jobs going to be different 3 years from now? How are the processes of my business going to be different 3 years from now because of the implementation of AI? And what he argues is that you need to do both. And ServiceNow has a project that they're working on, pulling people from the business units to look at mode 2 and come to some conclusions this summer. What's their best guess what their processes and roles should look like 3 years from now, because that actually informs the mode 1 that you invest in today and how you get there. So task flows, another just quick example that Andy McAfee at MIT uses is he studied the period of electrification of US factories in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And he said what happened is you had factories traditionally had, a big steam engine in the middle of the factory, and the power was distributed throughout the factory floor. And what happened in the first waves of electrification is the steam engine or diesel engine was just swapped out and you put in an electric engine. And then the power was distributed throughout the factory floor. The real change came over the next few decades where you had people who saw things differently and said, what if we put an electric motor at each point in the factory? What if we had a crane that could be enabled by distributing the electric motor and rethinking our work processes? So it's still early for a lot of these things. One example of where workflows are starting to change and break down, which Ethan Mollick cites, is around agile development. This idea of agile development, many of you are probably much more familiar with than I am, but basically involves daily check-ins and stand-ups and with the team. And actually the way that some of the work can flow with AI starts to break the agile process. So that's something that people are starting to look at. I have two more provocations, and we're going to shift to the more open discussion. One is that AI can definitely up-level the lowest skilled workers. The question now is, can it elevate the most skilled workers? And so a lot of you have probably seen there's been research out of MIT, Harvard, Stanford in particular over the last year. And what they found, and call centers is an area where they studied this really closely. If you gave an AI tool to a call center representative who was less skilled, less experienced, they saw really significant increases in their productivity measured by the number of customers issues they could resolve. And in one of the studies, the productivity gain was something like 38% for the less skilled workers. And you gave them a tool that effectively would observe their interactions with the customer and suggest solutions from the best practices and knowledge of of their more experienced colleagues. What these surveys found, and it's pretty clear this has been demonstrated in legal applications and a bunch of other settings, that lowest skilled workers actually can be really up-leveled because they benefit from the best practices of their more experienced peers when they're using some of these tools. The question is, how can you elevate the most skilled, most experienced workers whose practices have been generalized through AI? And what's interesting in the call center context, the researchers found that the most experienced workers, whereas the productivity of the least experienced went up 38%, the productivity of the most experienced workers actually declined, which is counterintuitive. You give them an AI tool and their productivity goes down. What the researchers hypothesized is that the tool was actually a distraction. And if you were so good at your job, it interrupted the flow and you actually became less efficient at doing this. And so this is a question like, what does AI do for those most skilled workers? There is some early research that suggests that it can benefit them. And Ethan Mollick was involved in some of this research, and it was done at BCG, at the consulting group, where they had pretty skilled consultants and they gave them some AI tools to use. And they found that they could actually improve their performance on a bunch of kind of consulting tasks. They were asked to imagine a non-existent shoe manufacturer, and they were given a bunch of sort of consulting assignments around it. And the AI tools help them. But this is a question. Lowest skilled workers can be up-leveled. Can the most skilled be up-leveled using these tools significantly? And then the last provocation, the fifth one, is I would say AI tools cannot be trusted with people decisions. And the reason for this, I'm sure you all have been pitched, and probably a lot of you are already using AI tools that are in your people functions, including around recruiting and talent management and things like that. The fact is these models have really significant biases that are built into them. There's a very chilling research paper that was released from researchers at Oxford and Stanford and I think University of Chicago pretty recently, where they found that AI models had bias against people whose language, whose speech patterns, whose sort of typing patterns were most associated with African American dialects. And in those cases, the AI models recommended that they be given less prestigious jobs, that the AI models were more likely to recommend that they be convicted of crimes, and the AI models were more likely to recommend that people who are communicating using African American dialects be given the death penalty as a sentence for any crimes. So what I would just urge you is, and there are some legal requirements around this, including in New York City, which requires an audit of any hiring systems that use AI for bias. Like, take that pretty seriously because you may not realize what's going on. The other chilling thing about that paper is that they tried to give the AI tools instructions to remove the bias. And what the tools did in return is that they tried to hide their bias, but they remained just as biased. So explicit bias became the equivalent of subconscious bias in these tools. So it's not as simple as telling it not to discriminate against people with these, patterns. So this all may actually sound, I realize, sound pretty dire. And before we jumped into the discussion, we're doing a bunch of research now on how organizations, specific organizations, are bringing AI in ways that are involving workers, empowering workers, good for the business, creating the kind of workplaces that you all want to be running and delivering business results. And I can just quickly tick off a few examples. One of them is the People organization at Cisco. And I can share more details on these examples where they've done a hackathon with their team. They got 2,500 ideas from their team. They had their team vote on them. And they had a handful of ideas that they did a kind of hack day and split people up into teams to work on. Several of those ideas are actually going into production or going more seriously into their operations. There's an interesting example from Accenture where they have a team of writers that's hundreds of people who write proposals for sales at Accenture, and they created a tool called Proposal Builder, which actually helps them create better proposals. And they involved the writers from the very earliest time. They communicated with them about it. They've trained them on it. They've gotten their feedback. They've iterated it. And what the teams are saying is that the writers are happy to have this tool, and they're producing better results. Another company that we've been talking to is Skillsoft. One thing that they do that might be an idea you want to take is they ask for people for ideas about how to use AI in their roles and across the company to further business results, and they offer incentives, so bonuses for people whose ideas are picked up, and that gives people reason to come forward with the ideas. Asana has a Slack channel that we like. It's called AI Inspiration and Adventures, and it's a place where people put their ideas for how AI can be used. It's also a place where people in the organization are discussing ethical questions that rise in the context of AI, raising any concerns they have and discussing them, which is a level of communication and transparency that seems pretty important. And then the last example, corporate example that I'll mention is Coursera. And this is just leading by example. Coursera CEO Jeff Medjin-Calda is trying to model the use of generative AI. He shares prompts live with his team, uses the tools, tries to make clear that, it's kind of messy and we're all learning. And these things don't sort of direct you to a straight line. So I'm going to stop there, and we're going to take any questions or interventions, feedback you have. And I'm going to pull in Todd and Eric first to share what their reactions are to some of these provocations. I think a few of you have asked for research references to the research, and in follow up, I'll share my email, and I'll happy to share any of the links with you in follow up to this. So Eric, I'm going to turn to you first. I sort of shared what we're hearing from different places, and what the researchers that we're talking to are saying. What resonates with you and what feels most relevant to you? And then we'll go to Todd after that.
I mean, there's a couple of things. I think, I'm not going to say I'm a cynic, but I'm pretty grounded about some of the stuff, because a lot of times there's a big dose of marketing, I think, on things. And I think it's interesting because that tends to have the effect of getting folks to say, this is once again something that's coming, and it ends up not materializing. My sense is, even if that's true short term, in terms of it may take 3 or 4 years for all of us to see really right in front of our face applications, if that. When it happens, it'll happen really fast. So it's the timing about things that's probably variable. And we talk about things like, massive job displacement as if it's a tomorrow thing, when it's not. I think for most companies, it depends on the makeup of the jobs that you have. If you have a lot of expertise-driven roles, again, a big constraint of moving into leveraging Gen AI, for example, is still based on how many folks really understand the technology. And I think there's a big gap there today. And something as basic as the data quality and quantity that you have that you're actually putting through these models, right? At the end of the day, this is a tool that you're talking about. It is a 2024 version of a calculator, right? For those of us that remember kind of, the introduction of something like that and how it just changes things. This is a form of an introduction of a tool. So I think for me, I'll speak from a BMC perspective. I think that as you try to get ahead and you try to kind of dive in with some of this technology, I've started with my function. So in a company of about 6,400 people, I've got an organization of about 115 or so people. The first thing has been to kind of context what I think this is, what this technology is and isn't for our company, and I think for us as employees. And it's really about couching it as an augmentation tool, as a productivity tool. And then downstream, I think what will wash out inevitably is, hey, do I need 2 of these people versus 3? I think that part, I think, will play itself out. But I think, and to really kind of embrace what's possible, there's kind of like you remove the anxiety of that. So a couple of the examples that you gave, I think, from Cisco, that's stuff that we've done. One of the things that I've done with my organization is I rolled out a couple of iterations of enablement. The first one was, hey, how do you spell AI? The second one was, how do you move up the stack and how do you really get to understand the use of it? What is it? What are use cases? And concurrent to that, we'd been doing idea hackathons for a while. So the latest cohort that we put through, we said, hey, specifically go out, think about use cases within the people function where we should be using it. So in other words, it's them coming up with where the applications exist, right? So there's buy-in, there's enablement that we've provided that I take as well as everybody else, 4 or 5 hours of it that we farmed out for everybody to do. And then they came back. And sure enough, you get really surprised about how creative folks are about thinking where those applications are. And some of those initially, are more in the chatbot space, more in the self-service space, more in kind of that experiential phase, which is fine, because if that's the entry point, then that's fine. I think, for us, we've thought about, organically, what are the things that we can do? I work for a software company. So an advantage that we have is one of the products that we have or that we're developing is a form of GPT, right? That we're using to commercialize in the work that we're doing. So we see examples of where this plays out with customers, right? We have a mainframe business. They're not developing a bunch of folks with 30 years of experience in assembler and in COBOL and in these kind of experiences. So what we are commercializing through products is how are you using this technology so that somebody comes, has very limited experience, is able to kind of do some of the code work that traditionally was done by somebody that had that. So even in our company, we see where externally there's some of these applications. And then every single partner that we work with on a people systems front, whether it's the work that we do on applicant tracking, whether it's the work that we do on fair pay, whether it's the work that we do on some of the development, because there's a lot of innovation being done by companies like Coursera and Skillsoft and the like, in terms of algorithmically coaching people on building their skills, which is some of the most exciting stuff I think that's coming. And by the way, not just on technical skills, but on soft skills. It's almost like an on-demand coach are some of the use cases that we see that are out there. It's then figuring out if all these companies are moving ahead, like for example, Copilot for Microsoft. Everybody here uses Office 365. There is AI that exists in Excel, that exists in PowerPoint, that exists in Word, that gets people, Kevin, to your point, that may be low skilled, take Excel as an example and can translate them into becoming actually quite proficient simply with the use of Gen AI. So, I mean, that's a broad stroke of how we're looking at it, but it starts from a much more grounded, a much more context where the opportunity is. And then I'll close by saying that to me, fundamentally, I look at the work and I look at most roles as having a transactional piece, a relational piece, and like an expertise piece. And I think the ratio of that is going to invert, right? A lot of transactional work will become less because AI will augment the work. And I think we will have an opportunity to spend more on the relational and on the expertise, which, by the way, has skill implications for our people. But even that can be augmented by AI. And I think that's over the next 3 or 4 years, that's, I think, the path that we're on.
Yeah, that's great. And that distinction between augmentation and automation is one probably everyone has heard by now. It's Eric Brynjolfsson at Stanford has done some of the most interesting work there. And the idea is that, as people leaders and leaders of companies, rather than looking for jobs to cut, you can look for ways that people can be augmented to improve the quality of the work. That's much more motivating for employees as well. If you approach it that way, and ultimately is probably a better longer term business strategy. I want to, Todd, I'll Eric, I'll come back to you in a minute about this. One of the questions that I hear a lot is about the governance of the use of AI, including in places where it touches people activity. I want to pull in Todd first, but we should be sure to touch on how you're thinking about that. Todd, what's your reaction to the provocations and what Eric just said in the context of where you're at?
Yeah, so thank you. I a lot there to unpack, obviously. A couple key points that I think about, and I use this term around people, or this statement, is that, AI is democratizing what I call brute force computing power. So to me, it's a bit like the fax machine, is that, once the fax machine came in, you could do the same thing, good or bad, same processes, same weaknesses and strengths. You just did it faster. Now that results in other opportunities and risk, but the reality was it didn't necessarily day one change anything other than the time period. I come from an IT perspective, as CIO, obviously, and I also, from the grocery world, think about low margin that we have as compared to some other businesses, and the efficiency side is very important to us. And because we're dealing with food and a lot of it fresh, time is very important to us as we make changes in our approach. So, what of the provocation statements that you have to me, I mean, a couple key points come out to me, and one of them is very interesting to me, is the bias side, because my immediate blink when I heard that question and saw it was, well, humans are training for the most part AI, or AI is using articles written by humans and data out there. So why we would be surprised that bias exists in a computer model, because it's not a person. It is, again, brute force computing power of taking text and guessing the next words, at its core. So, we have a tough time removing bias from people as well. So I don't have an answer for that, but I think to your point about making sure that, we are cognizant of that is extremely important. And it's something that I think is going to be difficult for people for it to resonate with them, because they're going to think, well, it's a computer and, it's not going to have that. So I think that's incredibly interesting. So that's more just kind of a comment to that. There's a question in the chat about, given the shrinking labor force, isn't AI replacing jobs a good thing in the long run? I mean, I don't think it's either good nor bad. It just is. I think that, if you can get rid of, and I think Eric and Kevin, you both kind of referenced, this automation, augmentation, but if you can get rid of the boring part of a job, I mean, I also think you're going to get just happier labor workforce, quite frankly, because most people just want to, at the core, they just want to provide and make impact. And you can't do that if you're repeating the same thing, 438 times to that. But what's interesting, and this comes again from an IT perspective, is, you can do that for a call center agent. It actually requires that you have more comprehensive and completeness in your processes, in your operations in the back end. And we see that all the time in just any project that goes on, right? Usually the errors that occur are the things that aren't accommodated for systematically, but a human at the other side of that equation or before was the one that was able to process through it. So what I'm giving these examples for is that, as much as I'm in love with AI as a technologist, I also think it's going to be, in some ways, no more different than what we have today with regards to where are you in the business, how good are your associates and employees, are they curious, do they have the ability to process, and accept change. You're still going to face the expectations that are unrealistic of a CEO who's saying now he's going to reduce personnel costs because of AI. I mean, that's, you're just going to shift. I mean, there might be a conversion cost reduction the first time you try it, but I don't know how much everyone here on this call has used ChatGPT. But if you go beyond just trying to ask a couple of simple questions, writing a proper prompt is difficult. And in fact, if you're really trying to do something halfway robust, you end up almost spending more time writing the prompt and figuring that out than just doing the dang work. That being said, you're also accessing a lot more information that you couldn't do if you did it on your own. So, I think that's, a major thing I think about. The final thing I would want to touch on, Kevin, that you brought up on upskilling, the lowest skilled workers versus the most skilled. I thought it was interesting that you said it was a distraction to those that are most skilled. And, you know, what I would ask is, though, it totally makes sense. But on the flip side, if you could take that person who's most skilled and use AI to actually pass that down to the least skilled, then again, that percentage you gave of, 38, I think, percent improvement or whatever it was, maybe it gets to 50. So when do you take some of your most skilled people and actually have them start thinking about that train the trainer concept, but doing it differently, than before, for it? We're using, it's just one example and then I'll stop. We have pricing strategies here obviously at the grocery store. And the other day, somebody in our pricing group said he has a 158-page document that encompasses all of the pricing strategy concepts and learnings and wisdom. And that when he hires somebody new, they have various times that they go and, present this, or if someone asks a question, he'll refer them to the document or something of that nature. So we actually have an AI engineer. She's fresh out of school, but they tend to be the best on these type of things. And she's actually already meeting with him, and we're going to actually put it into where we're training an AI model internally. And the idea is we're going to make a pricing bot. And literally, we think by next week, we'll be able to test that. So I think that to me is we've done nothing different than use AI, very simple, kind of chat GPT type functionality to take a document that already existed with wisdom from someone who's already here. And we're just going to, democratize it and put it out to the masses of being able to use it. Now, the final thing to lead into your question is there is a lot of governance, though, that we need to put in place before I actually really release that, because you're talking about some of the most important institutional knowledge and collateral that we have here, and we do not want it getting into a place where it shouldn't be. So
that's great. And so, Todd, in terms of the governance, can you be more specific about how you're approaching these questions of bias and governance in terms of what the AI is you're allowing AI to interact with, how you're using it, and any organizational oversight that you're requiring? Some places have central, like, working committees that have people from different functions, including legal and IT and HR, that have to approve any significant AI related project. What's your approach?
Yeah, so we're still, I'd say, infants in this, but we definitely have an AI steering committee. It's just getting started, and we're going to do it across the business, and we're going to do it at lower than the executive level because we think we'll get more participation and active feedback that way. That's number one. We're certainly going down the legal route and making sure people understand that. The third piece is we are thinking a lot about security. So as an example, if you're rolling out Copilot with Microsoft anywhere in your organization, there is a long, long list of suggestions and requirements that Microsoft itself has to make sure you have in place so that when someone asks a question of Copilot, it doesn't inadvertently crawl your your data stores and present something it shouldn't to someone it shouldn't do that to. A lot of work there. So understanding, the security requirements and how you store your data and what's there. We're having to update all of our vendor security agreements. So when we partner with somebody, we are now have text in there talking about not only our data not being allowed to train their AI, because a lot of companies are trying to use that, but also that they must let us know when they're using AI that it has any way, shape, or form, interaction with us for that. I will tell you, Kevin, we're not thinking a lot about bias right now. And I would say that's probably because we didn't think about it. Not that we shouldn't. And I mean, just alone in your comments and some of the information you gave is a reminder that is something we need to think about. We refer to hallucinations a lot, and some people have landing pages in their company. If you allow ChatGPT access, before you leave that, companies will present a page that says, hey, you're getting ready to go to ChatGPT. Data's not secure. Don't put company data. And by the way, everything you hear from it is not true. And so, what do we need to do from an expansion of that, across the organization as well? As those are the things that we need to think about. And bias needs to be probably a word that you use instead of maybe being a little less committal to it. So to make sure people think about it.
That reminds me of the text you sometimes see on disposable coffee cups that says, beware the contents might be hot. You're doing a similar thing with AI. What you're about to experience may not be reality. And it's interesting you mentioned about being really careful about data security. One example I've heard from one place was that one of the tests they were doing was trying to make sure to look and see whether they could discover the CFO's salary if they were using some of these tools. And they wanted to make sure that that was kind of their standard test to
Well, related
determine.
to HR, Kevin, that's exactly the biggest risk we found here is that, I'm not worried per se about the IT team using some of Copilot because we don't have access to that information. But when you move over to the HR department here, those files are just sitting there unpassword protected in their private data storage area, et cetera. Who knows what they're going to pick up asking a simple question in the way that Microsoft works.
Yeah. Eric, I want to pull you into this question of governance in the people function, how you're approaching that structurally, how you're thinking about where the guardrails are.
There's probably a couple of things here. I think just to kind of build on what Todd had said, I think from a committee or from a hub perspective, for us, it's legal, it's IT, and it's the privacy office. Because again, this is data. So it touches in GDPR and the binding corporate rules that we have. So we flow this kind of stuff through that group. And there's other functional representation operations on those discussions, HRs on those discussions. So I think that's how we talk about it. Although I'll step to the side for a second, kind of take my hat off and saying that's also a reason for killing progress. I mean, so we will talk ourselves out of not doing stuff because the conservative path is always the easier path. So I think within that structure, part of what I'm looking for is, and this is, I reach out to our CIO and I say, how do we put a pilot? How do we sandbox an opportunity to use something like Copilot in a way that based on the data and the provisions, the permissions that exist, you put some of those protections in. I think, the classic place of bias is on recruitment, right? On application tracking system. I think we leverage it with a clear eye of whatever data you get. You're still training the model. You're still training the data to become, you're still doing that. You're still refining job descriptions. You're still refining these things iteratively. So you use it if you've got, 500 applicants to maybe get you down to 100 applicants, right? In terms of where you're at. And then you're even still going back and you're kind of scrubbing through a little bit of the other 400 in a way to make sure somebody isn't missed out simply because some people are really good at writing algorithmically oriented CVs and some people aren't, which really gets back to this notion of the first distinction that's going to happen that we will feel are people that understand AI and how to use it and those that don't. That's the first big separation I think we're going to see in the workforce. And that's going to manifest itself easily in this example through people simply applying for roles, right? They'll know what it is to do. And it's not as if that didn't exist before. It's not like Gen AI is some brand new thing that didn't allow algorithms, which already existed, like at places like LinkedIn. So I think that's just a comment around how you have to be vigilant about, as Todd said, the fact that these aren't, pure from a quality perspective. Again, you've got to look at this as an evolution and as an iteration. And then, yeah, I mean, you work within your company's structure of governance that you have, but I think you have to force the dialogue into where do you wedge open a space to really kind of introduce and to leverage it. So I'll give you a couple of examples where even if your company has an allergy towards AI, first of all, it's a myth that your employees aren't using it. It's on their iPhones, right? It's embedded in all these applications that they use, so they're already using it, right? And large language models. But for example, I was talking to one of our heads of product management, and we were having this conversation. And he was talking about being in the car, talking with the general manager of a business, and they were going back and forth on ideas for a business case that they wanted to make. And after the conversation, he simply called up ChatGPT and went back and forth, trying to take that conversation that he had just had, presenting it and building it into a business proposal. When he got home, he turned around and he emailed the proposal to the GM. And she's like, when did you do this? You were in the car. It was that fast. And again, depending on what data you're using, I think the one I shared with us the other week was, I was talking to one of my employees who can spell Excel, and had some work that she needed to do where, you know, she wanted to do formula work in Excel. So what she did is she went out to ChatGPT and said, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. What's the formula and how would I use it? ChatGPT spat out what the formula was, told her how to insert it into her worksheet. That's all she did, and whammo, she had exactly what someone who's proficient in Excel would have taken classes to go do. Those are two really simple examples of, I think, the unlock, the productivity unlock that you start to see with the technology in use. This is before you get into, okay, what's my digital strategy and what's the governance and all these other things that do have to be in place, but in many corporate environments are going to be used as a way of just forestalling kind of the adoption of the technology.
Eric, I like the example you cited earlier about mainframe programmers. It's like a perennial issue. You have the programmers retire who actually know how to code for those things, and using AI to actually help other people learn and do the programming. Just a few quick references in following up on what you're doing. I spoke recently with Nicola Moreau, the CHRO of IBM. She said they get about 5 million resumes a year, and they won't use any technology to screen them. A human looks at every single resume, and that's for partly because these questions are biased. In her case, it's also because she doesn't believe that the current tech screening tools accurately reflect are aligned with IBM's skills-based hiring model. You know, I think that's around credentials and understanding skills. So that's one thing. The second thing is that Eric, you were talking about the distinction between people who are using AI and who are not. And there's that line people cite, you're not going to be replaced by AI, you're going to be replaced by someone who knows how to use AI
Yes.
in your job. But I just wanted, for this group, I think it's really important to note the existence of the gap by race, gender, and age around AI literacy and levels of comfort. And I think part of what I would suggest is that it's the responsibility of company leaders to be sure that they have older workers who are proactively invited to upskill and to be modeling their use of AI in their roles, to have women who we know are less likely to actually have experience with generative AI and have more anxiety around it. We know this from a large-scale survey that we've done. And also workers of color actually have less opportunities in their job generally to be using generative AI. So I would say that there's a gap there that can be bridged, but it's really important to proactively think about it.
Hey, Kevin.
Yeah.
Could I comment on that real quickly?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So interestingly, I think a lot about that comment you made about access. You know, and I'll tell you the reason. I've actually have a video that I mentioned during our planning process that I wanted to just talk about very quickly. I actually have the video. I don't know if it's possible to share on here. I mean, I know it is technically, but if we have time for it. But ChatGPT will run on your phone. And I don't know what the percentages are, but they're extremely high when you look at disadvantaged or lower economic demographics. They all have phones. And, you know, I say they all, but there's phones access and you can get that power. So again, I'll just keep coming back to that democratization of it as well. And because I think of that access, if you can get internet, which is a challenge for many households, there is absolutely no doubt to that. In the grocery world, we provide, or at Southeastern Grocers, we provide free guest Wi-Fi when you walk in because we have a very large loyalty personalization mobile app initiative. And so we have about 900,000 people and about 500,000 that actually use our app every day. or every week in some way, form, or fashion to get deals, et cetera. So when you come into the to our store, you can actually get on our guest Wi-Fi because we don't want you on our network and use it. We see a lot of traffic to other places, that we don't. So I'm not saying by any means that, that makes a lot of sense. But this video that I have from someone who works for me is a 3-year-old granddaughter, and she wanted to wear her favorite shoes to school. And she kept asking her dad about it and so forth and so on. So he put the tablet in front of her, the iPad, and gave her a conversational chat version of the Chat GPT. And, for about 1.5 minutes, he recorded it. It lasted longer, and she asked multiple questions, but she explained to the the tablet, why she wanted to wear her favorite shoes, and her dad wouldn't let her. And the AI came back and said, well, it sounds like he doesn't want you to do it because of X, Y, and Z. Have you thought about asking him, this or telling him that? And they actually very quickly kind of worked out, the reasoning that she wanted to wear her shoes and then to go back to her dad, which she did end up doing. Now, the dad still didn't let her wear the shoes because they had holes in them. And that was the real issue, right? So I do wonder too, down the road is today, you're right, this access and some of the challenges there for it, that it's limited. But I just can't believe that we won't, because all you need is an internet connection and you have it on the phone, and it doesn't require heavy loads of applications or processing power on your device, that you're going to see a level of access that is much more than historically you would say today, because they have to have a computer or something of that nature. So I'll just stop there.
Yeah, and with your IT background, that this is a unique technology and that it's accessible to pretty much anyone, as opposed to requiring coding
Right.
experience or specific technical expertise or things like that. We have just a few minutes left. There's some great conversation in the chat, including Tim Jurgensen, who people should check out. There's a example that he cites in there of using AI for retention of workers in healthcare, based by analyzing employee survey results to identify people who are at risk of turnover. In the minutes, the time that's left, and you can put this in the chat, and I think, Cindy, we can have people come on. Is there anybody who has a burning question or an example of how they're using it that they just can't keep to themselves? We have time for maybe 1 or 2 of these in the few minutes we have left. Let's see. Do we have anybody want to jump in? I don't know.
I just
think
had
we
a
can
comment,
pull
which
in.
was
Yeah,
mostly
go ahead.
on your part about it helping lower skilled workers more than higher skilled. I had an example last week when I was talking to the founder of a startup, and he was talking about how he was using Claude, which is Anthropic's version for coding. And I said, hey, can you just show me how you actually do this real scenario? So he showed me, like, he was creating pages which are specific to different states in the US. And he said, listen, I just generated the code. I asked, he put some instructions, and then it automatically generated like code, which was like pages, which would just create the whole thing. And he's like, for the most, my assessment, it's fairly correct. And my job now is to just test it to ensure it's accurate. And this would have taken me hours. So his example was it's made him like 3x more productive as a software engineer. So I think as this gets more evolved, I think there's clearly implications on people who can use it right, even in higher scale roles, to get significant benefits.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that example. Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
I mean, a way of thinking about it is today represents the least capability that you'll have in the system on the material or on this technology. It only grows, right? So it just will continue to evolve, whether we try to suppress it or not. I mean, my son, as an example of just a current day college student, attends the lecture class. There are apps that take the lecture, they translate and summarize the lecture, and they create flashcards to study the material that was covered in the lecture. That was, for many of us, a time laborious process of transcoding written notes into something like that. And that's done instantaneously. And that's today. And again, back to this notion of over the next 3 or 4 years, you know, the leaps that we'll continue to make, both in, you know, refining out hallucinations, refining out the data sets that this is built on, refining out some of these things. So eventually it finds its way, I think, into each of our lives. And like, you know, like Todd said, most people have some form of GPT already on their phones, and the next version of iPhone and the iOS 18 will have a version of, I'm sure, either Google's AI as part of a strategic alliance or their own organically developed version of it, in which case it's pretty ubiquitous at that point.
We just add, I think we're there time for one more person, and I think we're and actually just see in the chat Beth recommending Women Defining AI, which she's part of, which I could not recommend more highly. It's Helen Cupp, who's a former Slack executive, who's put that together, and it's an amazing resource, pretty like unique. And I think for $100 you get a really valuable membership and training in AI. I think we're just about out of time. Cindy, I don't know if you have any last words of wisdom. Eric and Todd, this has been great to have you. I hope I'm happy to follow up with anybody. I'll just put my email address in the chat, and you're welcome if there's any research or anything that I referenced. I'm happy to pass it along to you. And there's some
Kevin?
great examples flowing through. Yeah.
And also I would love for you to just share a little bit about Charter Pro, because I think that you guys do a lot of research, and what
Thank
you
you.
put out there is amazing. And we'll put a link in the follow-up email so that if you're interested in it, you can link in easily.
Thank you. Thank you, Solange. Also, we do have a free newsletter also. Basically, the idea of Charter was that there needed to be a next-gen Harvard Business Review that equipped leaders with research-backed approaches that could help them navigate some of the most urgent workplace and people questions specifically. And so we're focused on the most urgent problems that people have and are trying to figure out, and it includes AI in work, flexible working, ways to make inclusion work. And actually, a lot of what we're dealing with these days is at the intersection of those. What is the role of a manager? Well, how do you assess performance? How do you think about compensation in the world of AI with flexible working in ways that are inclusive and equitable? And so we do a bunch of our own research, which is backed by foundation, some of it in conversation with academic researchers, our own reporting. You know, as we heard, we're talking to lots of companies, and I really welcome, you know, we'll share the information for this membership that we have. We have a free newsletter and a membership that's like a Harvard Business Review type setup, where there are resources for you, and we can make them available to teams as well. So thank you for your time. I welcome any examples or feedback you have as well, because it makes our own reporting and research even better. And
Well,
thank you,
thanks,
Cindy.
Kevin. Yeah, thank you. And I'll send a follow-up email to everyone with the recording. And then I captured all the links that Kevin sent. And then you'll also be I'll copy Kevin and Todd and Eric. So if you guys want to reach out to any of those three, you'll be able to do that through the email. So thanks everybody for being on. Appreciate it. More to come, I'm sure.
Thank you, Cindy.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric and Todd.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cindy.
Yeah, thanks, Todd and Eric. You guys were awesome.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye.